The academy chamber was vast and filled with the quiet hum of alien students settling into their seats, each one different in size, shape, and color, but all united in the nervous anticipation of today's lesson. At the center of the room stood a holographic projector, its glow casting shifting shadows across the curved walls. The instructor, a tall, scaled being with eyes that gleamed like polished stone, adjusted the controls, and with a hiss, the image came alive before the class. There was a monstrous figure, a machine forged of steel and blades, its design both beautiful and horrifying. The instructor's voice carried with authority as he began the lesson. Today we study the screaming metal predator, a terror encountered on the battlefields. Of the outer rim, it is said to move faster than the eye can follow its body. Armored, its edges razor sharp, its cry a screech of tearing air that freezes even the bravest soldiers. This creature has ended entire squads with a single charge, and few who face it live to speak again. Silence filled the room as the holographic predator spun and shifted, its bladed limbs gleaming under the light. Alien students leaned back in their chairs, some curling appendages around themselves, others shifting uneasily. Their species had long feared machines that seemed alive, predators that could not be reasoned with, but one sound broke the silence, a sound that echoed strangely in the tense chamber. It was laughter, deep rolling and uncontrolled. All eyes turned toward the source. In the back row sat the human, the only one of their kind in the academy, his head tilted back, his shoulders shaking, his laughter ringing through the hall. The instructor froze mid-sentence, his scaled eyes narrowing. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the laughter. The human wiped a tear from his eye, his grin wide as he leaned forward, still chuckling. Sorry, he said between breaths. "But that thing, that predator, you are all so afraid of it, is just hilarious." The alien students blinked, confused by the word hilarious. One brave student, a feathered creature with sharp eyes, raised a hand. "How is this funny? How can you laugh at the screaming metal predator? Do you not understand what it has done?" The human chuckled again and leaned back in his chair, his gaze locked on the spinning hologram. "Oh, I understand perfectly. I just think you all are giving it way too much credit. You call it the screaming metal predator, like it is some unstoppable nightmare, but to us humans this is nothing new." The class erupted into murmurs, whispers filling the chamber as eyes darted between the hologram and the human. Some thought he had lost his mind. Others wondered if humans were simply incapable of fear. The instructor slammed his clawed hand against the console. "Silence," he commanded. "Explain yourself, human. What do you mean by nothing new?" The human's grin turned sharper, almost predatory in itself. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You see, to you, this machine is a horror, something that terrifies your people. But on Earth we have built machines that scream louder, fly faster, and cut sharper than this thing ever could back home. We used to ride them like it was nothing." The class went silent once more. The idea sounded impossible, but the human's voice carried an odd confidence, a quiet authority that made his words hard to dismiss. Another student asked, their voice trembling, "You mean to say your kind has seen such predators before?" The human's laughter softened into a smile. "Seen them. We made them. And we made them better." The hologram flickered, its bladed limbs spinning in a mock charge. But the human only shook his head, unimpressed. He tapped a finger against the desk like a teacher correcting a child. "If you think this predator is terrifying, then you would never survive a single day in the skies of Earth." The instructor frowned, his mind racing as he studied the human's expression. Humans were strange. They laughed when others cried. They smiled in the face of death, and now here was one laughing at a predator that had slaughtered so many soldiers across the galaxy. The alien students could not look away, caught between fear and fascination. Whispers grew louder, some in disbelief, some in awe. The human leaned back once again, his smile unwavering, and said, "The truth is, what you fear is something we would take apart, study, rebuild, and improve until it screamed even louder and flew even faster. That is why I laugh, because to us this predator is not a monster, it is a toy." The words hung in the air, heavy and shocking. The instructor struggled to find a response, his tail flicking nervously as he looked at his students, their faces pale, their eyes wide. The holographic predator continued its endless spin. But now no one was looking at it. Every gaze was fixed on the human whose laughter had shifted the entire atmosphere of the lesson. The silence that followed was almost unbearable, filled only by the faint hum of the projector. The students had come to learn about a predator today. But what they had truly learned was far more unsettling. They had learned something about the human sitting in their class, and that knowledge was far more terrifying than the hologram before them. The instructor stood frozen in place, his scaled hands tightening on the edge of the console. As the weight of silence pressed over the chamber, the alien students did not move, their gazes fixed on the human who still sat with that relaxed grin on his face as though he had said nothing strange at all. The instructor's voice came slow and heavy, finally breaking the quiet. "Explain, human. Why do you speak as though this predator is unworthy of fear? It has killed warriors who trained their whole lives. Entire squads have been ripped apart in moments. Yet you sit there and laugh as though it were a game." The human leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his eyes glinting in a way that made some of the students recoil. "It is not unworthy of fear," he said, his tone calm but sharp. "It is only unworthy of the fear you give it. You treat it as though it is beyond understanding. But to us it is familiar too. Familiar, in fact, when I look at this predator. I see machines from our past, machines that roared louder and cut deeper, and yet we controlled them. We rode them, and even made them dance to our commands." A low murmur spread through the chamber wings. Twitched tails curled, and feathered crests rose in unease. The alien students were not used to hearing a predator spoken of as if it were a plaything. One student with a long snout and trembling hands raised their voice. "You claim humans rode such things. You claim this is nothing to you. Then tell us, what do you mean? What are these machines you speak of?" The human smile softened, not mocking now, but edged with something darker. "A memory. I mean helicopters, aircraft, jet fighters, machines that screamed louder than thunder. Their blades cut the air in ways that would shake the earth beneath them, and yet we used them not to frighten ourselves, but to reach further, to fight harder, to survive. Against odds that would have crushed others." The room grew colder. In that moment, even though the temperature had not changed, the alien students sat stiff, their hearts pounding at the human's words, because the predator in the hologram was meant to be a lesson in terror, a warning against arrogance. Yet the human spoke of creatures far worse, as though they were tools, ordinary tools used and discarded when the next was built. The instructor hissed, disbelief dripping from his voice. "You expect us to believe that your kind could make such things, that your kind lived alongside predators louder and sharper than this and called them tools?" The human tilted his head, his grin never fading. "Do I expect you to believe it? No. But it is true whether you choose to or not." He pointed toward the hologram, his eyes narrowing. "The blades on that thing are meant to kill soldiers. But to us, blades were for cutting paths through forests, for farming, for shaping the world to our will. Our machines turned blades into extensions of our own hands, and when the world threw predators at us, we became predators ourselves." The alien students shifted in their seats, their minds racing with images they could not understand. Some imagined skies filled with screaming human machines, some imagined humans riding on them like hunters taming storms. Another student finally spoke, their voice high and fearful. "If what you say is true, then your kind must be mad to create predators willingly." The human laughed again, though softer this time. "Maybe we are mad, but that madness is why we are still alive." The instructor felt his scales tighten in unease. For the first time he was aware of just how quiet the chamber had become. It was not the quiet of discipline, but of something deeper. A silence born from fear, curiosity, and dawning realization. Every pair of alien eyes now saw the human differently, not as a simple student or outsider, but as something they could not categorize. He should have looked small in his seat, compared to the many strange shapes and colors around him, yet he seemed to fill the space with the weight of his presence. The human leaned back, his voice lowering into something that almost resembled a warning. "The screaming metal predator is dangerous, yes, but to humans danger is not something we run from, it is something we study, something we learn to control until it serves us." The human lifted his chin, his gaze sweeping across the silent room. "That is why I laugh, because you see a monster and I see a challenge, one that We would not fear, but master the words lingered and settled like smoke heavy and suffocating. The alien students exchanged nervous glances, their feathers bristling, their scales shivering, their skin shifting color patterns of alarm. The instructor opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. He knew enough of humans to realize the danger in their calm confidence. The holographic predator flickered once more, blades gleaming, shrieking as it simulated a charge, yet no one looked at it anymore. All eyes were on the human, and for the first time the screaming metal predator no longer seemed like the most dangerous thing in the room. The academy chamber did not return to its usual rhythm. After that lesson, instead, the air hung heavy and strange, as though every word the human had spoken refused to leave the walls. Students shuffled nervously in the corridors, whispering about what they had heard, their voices trembling between fear and disbelief. The human's laughter still echoed in their minds, more terrifying than the predator's scream itself. Soon word spread beyond the single classroom. Instructors from other disciplines grew curious. Some disbelieved the story, dismissing it as human arrogance, but others feared the possibility that the human had not exaggerated at all. So when the next lesson arrived, the chamber was more crowded than ever. Other instructors filled the side rows while students from different courses slipped in, trying to hide their eagerness. The projector hummed again and the predator returned in its spinning, gleaming form. But this time the eyes of the class did not focus on it. They turned instead toward the human, seated as calmly as before, his posture relaxed, his gaze unshaken. The instructor cleared his throat, his voice rough with unease. Today we will continue our analysis of the screaming metal predator. We will examine its movements, its behavior, its weaknesses. He paused and cast a sharp glance at the human, and perhaps we will hear if our human colleague wishes to enlighten us further. Whispers rushed through the room. Some alien students leaning forward, others sitting back as though distance might shield them from what the human might say. The human, however, did not immediately answer. He studied the hologram as if he were not in a class but remembering something far away. His lips curved into a faint smile, and when he finally spoke, his tone carried the calm weight of a storyteller. "Do you know why I laughed yesterday?" He asked. The question caught the room off guard. Silence stretched until a feathered student cautiously replied, "Because you think the predator is weak." The human shook his head. "No, not weak. Dangerous. Yes, but not unknown. I laughed because you fear it like it is beyond reason, but to humans there is nothing unfamiliar about it." His words fell like cold stones, and then he leaned forward, his voice lowering as he began to tell stories. Long ago on Earth we built things that roared louder than thunder, machines that ripped through skies with engines so loud they shook the bones of anyone nearby. Their blades spun faster than the eye could follow, slicing air into storms, and yet those machines were ours. We did not fear their scream. We used it as a weapon, our helicopters, our jet fighters. They were predators of the skies, and when their engines screamed, the earth trembled. Not because they were monsters, but because they were human-made. Some students flinched at the names, though they did not understand them. The words carried weight: helicopters, jets, engines. It all sounded alien yet alive. The human's expression darkened as he continued, and before that, before the skies were ours, we built ships with sails and oars, cutting through seas that drowned countless lives. We turned the ocean itself into a battlefield. We faced storms that tore mountains of water over us, storms that would kill entire fleets of your kind. And yet, we endured, we adapted. Every wave, every storm was another predator to master. His voice rose with each memory, and the aliens listened, their bodies stiff, their eyes wide. They had come to learn about one predator, and instead they were hearing of hundreds, their minds struggling to picture seas that swallowed fleets, skies filled with thunder made by machines, wars where men rode screaming engines into battle. Another instructor finally broke the silence, his voice hard with disbelief. "You claim your species thrived among predators of your own making, that you not only survived them but bent them to your will. Why would anyone create such horrors?" The human smiled, though there was no joy in it. "Survival," he said, plain and steady. "Earth is not kind. It throws predators at us every day. Animals, storms, landscapes, even the air itself can kill if you are weak. So we learned to make our own predators stronger than the ones we faced when danger came. We did not run. We became something. Worse, we built machines that screamed, we built weapons that roared, and we taught ourselves to laugh because fear would have destroyed us. The chamber was silent again. No one moved. The holographic predator flickered and shrieked, but its presence felt smaller, diminished against the stories spilling from the human's mouth. Some students could not bear to look at him anymore. Some could not look away, their thoughts twisting in fear and awe. The human leaned back, his tone softening as if delivering the final blow. You call this a screaming metal predator? We would have called it an opportunity to learn, and once we learned its secrets, it would never frighten us again. The alien student sat frozen, realizing with a chill that what their instructor had meant as a lesson in fear had become something else entirely. It had become a lesson in humanity, and that lesson was far more terrifying than the predator projected before them. The halls of the academy were no longer calm after the human's words. The story had traveled faster than light through the corridors, carried by whispering voices and trembling claws, until even the highest instructors knew of it. By the time the next gathering began, the chamber was filled beyond capacity. Every seat occupied, every wall lined with curious figures who had come to witness the strange creature that laughed at predators. Some were skeptical, expecting to see arrogance broken by truth. Others came with fascination, hoping to glimpse the reason why humans carried such a terrifying reputation. The projector activated once more, filling the air with the mechanical scream of the predator, its blades spinning in violent arcs. The sound usually struck fear into the hearts of students, but today it seemed weaker, muted by the memory of human laughter. The instructor stood with tense posture, his scaled hands trembling slightly as he addressed the assembly. The screaming metal predator, as you all know, is feared across battlefields. Entire legions have fallen before its charge, but yesterday our human colleague declared it a toy. His voice shook as though the admission pained him. Today we will seek clarity. Whispers rose among the audience heads, turning toward the human who sat quietly at the edge of the room, his posture casual, his gaze steady. It was as if the presence of so many eyes did not matter, as if he had been here many times before. Finally, the instructor gestured toward him. Human, you have the attention of this academy. Explain why you mock what others fear. Explain why your kind sees predators not as curses but as challenges. The human rose slowly from his seat, his figure smaller than many of the towering species around him. Yet he seemed to fill the chamber with weight. His eyes glinted in the light of the hologram, his voice carried smoothly when he began. When you speak of fear, I understand it well. Fear is the oldest companion of my species, but fear alone does not save you. It paralyzes, it blinds, it kills, so we learned long ago to turn fear into fuel, to stare at what terrified us and ask, how do we master it? He pointed toward the predator, still spinning its blades in endless rage. You see this, and you think of survival. We see it and we think of control. We imagine how to take it apart, how to rebuild it stronger, how to turn it from enemy into tool. The crowd shifted, some students drawing back their feathers, bristling, others leaning forward despite themselves as though pulled by invisible threads. The human continued, his tone calm but edged with pride on Earth. We lived beside predators every day, great cats with teeth that crushed bone serpents whose venom could end life in moments. Creatures that hunted us as prey, yet here we are, we learned to outthink them, outfight them, and even tame some into companions. Wolves became dogs, horses carried us. Lions became symbols of strength, and those we could not tame. We studied until their power became ours. His words struck hard, the aliens whispering furiously, some horrified that a species could speak of living beside such monsters, others unable to imagine taming predators. The way humans described one instructor from the rear called out, his voice strained. And yet you speak of machines as predators too. Do you mean your kind built them knowingly, knowing they would scream and kill? The human's grin flashed sharp. Yes, we built them, and in building them we built ourselves stronger. Our machines screamed. Louder than the storms, they flew through our tanks, crushed ground that no foot could cross our ships, rode oceans that swallowed worlds, and through it all we laughed. Not because it was easy, but because we refused to let fear master us. Murmurs rippled across the chamber. Some alien students clutched their seats, unable to hide their alarm. Others stared wide-eyed at the human as if he were not a student among them, but a living predator in disguise. The instructor's scales flickered in agitation, his tail lashing as he asked, "And what of this predator? Do you still claim it would fall to you?" The human's eyes narrowed, his voice low and certain. "It would fall to us. Not because it is weak, but because we would learn every angle, every flaw, every sound of its scream until the scream no longer meant fear but opportunity. We would ride it if we had to. We would cage it if we must. But it would never rule us." Again the room fell into silence as the weight of his words settled. Even the predator's holographic cry seemed faint, drowned out by the image the human painted in their minds. The students looked at him and no longer saw a figure smaller and fragile compared to them. They saw a shadow of something far more dangerous, a species that faced predators by becoming one themselves. In that silence, the Academy realized that the lesson had changed forever, for the predator spinning in the light was no longer the subject of fear. The true predator was the human standing calmly in their midst. The Academy Council could not ignore the whispers any longer. What began as a single lesson had grown into a storm of fear and fascination that spread across every hall, every gathering place, and every cluster of students. The story of the human who laughed at the screaming metal predator had become larger than the predator itself. So the council gathered in the great chamber and summoned both instructors and students to witness a test, one that would silence doubt or confirm the terrifying possibility that the human's words were true. The chamber was vast, its domed ceiling glittering with faint stars, and at its center stood the projector, expanded now to cast not only the predator's image but an entire simulation. A battlefield recreated with perfect detail. Bladed machines roaring across the projection, their metallic screams cutting through the still air. The audience shifted. Uneasily, claws tapped against seats, feathers bristled, scales rattled. Some had come to see the human, humbled, others to see if the fear gnawing at their hearts had reason. The lead counselor, a tall figure cloaked in silver scales, raised his hand and spoke. "The human has mocked what we fear. He claims to understand what we cannot. Today we will see if his claim carries weight." The holographic predator screamed and charged its bladed limbs, slicing through the simulated air, the ground beneath. It shuddered as it tore across the field. The noise was unbearable to many in the audience, but the human stood calm, his eyes narrowing as he studied its movements rather than shrink back. He stepped forward, one hand raised as if to silence the chaos. "Watch closely," he said, his voice steady. "This is how a predator reveals itself, not through its scream but through its pattern. Listen past the noise and see its weakness." The alien students leaned forward despite their fear, their eyes following his gaze as he pointed to the predator's stride. "See there," he said. "When it charges, the blades overextend the rotation, slows for a heartbeat, just long enough for someone to strike here." He gestured again. "When it screams, its engines flare wide. It expends power recklessly, and after the third scream, its energy dips, leaving it slower." He walked slowly around the projection, his eyes sharp, his tone precise, dissecting the predator's every move as if he had fought it 100 times before. Each word stripped away another layer of fear, replacing it with cold analysis, until the predator no longer seemed a nightmare, but a puzzle to be solved. The chamber was silent save for the human's voice. The counselors exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable but their unease clear. One finally spoke. "You speak as though you have fought such things before." The human smiled, faint, but hard. "Not this one," he said, "but predators like it many times over on Earth. We studied machines and creatures alike. Not because we had the luxury of choice, but because survival demanded it. Every predator leaves a trail, every machine has a weakness, and once we find it, the fear is gone." The audience shivered, some in awe, some in dread. The predator lunged again, its bladed limbs shrieking across the projection. The human stepped closer without flinching, his shadow cast against the glowing image, his voice cutting sharp enough to silence even its scream. "And if you gave me time, if you gave me the real thing, not this image, I would take it apart piece by piece until its scream belonged to me, not to it." The words hit harder than the predator's roar. Silence fell heavy, thick as though the entire chamber held its breath. The alien students no longer saw the hologram with terror. Instead, their gazes turned to the human, and many could not look for long, for in his calm certainty was something more frightening than the predator itself. The counselor finally lowered his hand, signaling, "The test complete." His voice carried no triumph, only quiet unease. "The lesson is finished, but the truth is clear. What we feared as legend, humanity sees as challenge." The chamber emptied slowly, whispers, racing again through the halls, yet louder now, unstoppable, for they all knew the predator had not been defeated in the simulation. But something far worse had been revealed. The human had proven that fear itself bent under his gaze, and the realization spread like wildfire through the academy. The academy could not contain the storm that followed the test, for the story left the chamber with every student and instructor who had witnessed it. And by the end of the day, it had reached every corner of the station. Alien recruits whispered it. In the mess hall, instructors debated it in hushed tones in their quarters, and even the counselors who prided themselves on their reason carried unease in their eyes. The screaming metal predator had once been a lesson in terror, a tool to humble, overconfident students, but now it had been turned into something else. A mirror that reflected more fear in the form of the human than in the predator itself. The human walked the halls in silence, but wherever he went, eyes followed, some with fascination, some with suspicion, and some with quiet dread. The alien students who once avoided sitting near him now avoided speaking at all, not because he had threatened them, but because the calm certainty in his voice still echoed in their minds. He had shown them weaknesses in a predator they could barely comprehend, and in doing so he had shown them something even greater, that humanity was not shaped by safety or comfort, but by constant war against the universe itself. The council called another assembly, this time private behind sealed doors, their scaled wings folded tight. Their feathered heads bowed in thought, their many different voices overlapped until the chamber trembled with argument. One declared that the human was too dangerous to remain, that his presence disturbed the balance of the academy. Another countered that to send him away would be foolish, for the knowledge he carried could rewrite their understanding of war. Still another argued that humanity was unpredictable, and that unpredictability was the true threat. They debated until the stars outside shifted in their slow orbit, and at last they fell silent, not because they had found agreement, but because fear had stolen their certainty. Meanwhile, the students continued to press the human with questions, though many trembled as they asked them. They wanted to know more of Earth, more of these machines and storms and predators he had spoken of. The human never boasted, never shouted. His words came steady, as if he were not describing nightmares but simply truth. He told them of war machines called tanks that rolled across battlefields, unstoppable thunder given wheels. He told them of warships that carried cannons which could level cities in moments. He told them of skies filled with bombers so loud their passing shook the earth and rained fire upon it. And through it all he spoke of men and women who climbed into those machines, not to run from predators, but to master them. The students listened with growing unease, their bodies betraying fear, even as their minds craved the knowledge. The instructors too began to question him, some with hostility, demanding to know why humanity would choose such paths, others with curiosity, desperate to learn. His answers were always the same: because Earth never gave us peace, because predators came in so many forms that we learned the only way to live was to become greater predators ourselves. He spoke not with pride but with inevitability, and that inevitability frightened them more than any boast could have. Rumors spread that the council considered restricting him from speaking, that they feared his words more than his presence. But the more they tried to contain it, the further the story spread. Until even in the training simulation, students began to whisper human lessons when faced with their challenges. Remember its pattern, remember its weakness, remember what the human said. His laughter no longer echoed through one chamber. It echoed through the entire academy like a shadow that none could escape. The council finally summoned him one evening, their chamber cold, lit only by the faint blue glow of the stars through the great window. They did not speak with anger but with cautious reverence. One counselor asked, "Do you realize what you have done? Human, do you realize that you have shifted the way our young think of fear and of predators?" The human simply nodded, his expression unreadable, and answered, I told the truth. What you do with it is not mine to command. That answer silenced them more than any elaborate defense could have, for they understood then that he was not trying to change them. He was only revealing what humanity already was, a species that laughed at predators not because they were fearless but because they had faced so many. That fear itself had become fuel. The council dismissed him, but they did not dismiss their unease outside the chamber. Students waited, their eyes fixed on the human with awe and dread alike, and in that moment it was clear that the predator was no longer the lesson of the academy. The lesson was humanity, and it was spreading like fire through dry grass, unstoppable and consuming everything in its path. The academy awoke to a new rhythm in the days that followed. Whispers of the screaming metal predator were no longer whispers at all. They were drowned beneath a greater story, the story of the human who had laughed in its face for generations. The predator had been used as a warning, a reminder that arrogance led to death. But now students walked into their lessons carrying a different memory. They no longer looked at the hologram with dread. They looked at the human and saw a truth more unsettling than blades or screams could ever be. The instructors tried to restore order. They lectured with more authority. They spoke of the danger of underestimating enemies, yet their words rang hollow. The students had heard something that could not be unheard, and every time the projector spun the predator into view, they remembered how easily the human had taken it apart with words alone when the human entered the chamber. Now silence fell not from discipline but from gravity. His presence shifted the air the way a storm bends trees, and none could deny it. The council watched from above, their debates sharper, their decisions slower. Fear bound them tighter than reason. Some wanted to send him away, claiming his knowledge corrupted the students. Others argued that what he offered was invaluable and that to cast it out would be folly. One elder spoke words that unsettled even the bravest. We have taught our young to fear predators, yet the human teaches them to master predators. Which lesson will they carry when they face the battlefield? The students themselves struggled with the change. Some lay awake in their quarters, seeing images of skies filled with screaming machines, seas turned to battlefields, armies marching into storms without pause. Some dreamed of the humans' words, laughter turning into thunder in their minds. A few found strength in it, believing that if humans could survive such horrors, then perhaps they could too. But most felt fear. Fear not of the predator, but of the realization that humanity lived where others would have perished and called it ordinary. The human did not boast, he did not lecture as though commanding. He answered when asked. He explained when pressed, and each answer carried the same weight of inevitability. When asked why he was not afraid, he said, "Because fear does not keep you alive. Only learning does." When asked why his people would build screaming machines, he said, "Because the world gave us storms and predators and we needed to become storms ourselves." When asked if the predator would ever defeat humanity, he only smiled and replied, "Nothing ever has for long." The council decided at last to confront him, not in secrecy but before the academy. They gathered students, instructors, and leaders. The predator's hologram flickered again, roaring in its endless scream, but all eyes turned toward the human. The lead counselor spoke with heavy voice. "Human, you have changed what this place is. You have shifted our understanding. Tell, how now the truth? Are you saying that this predator, this screaming metal machine, is nothing to your kind?" The human stood calmly, his shadow stretched by the glow of the hologram, his voice steady as stone. "It is not nothing. It is dangerous. Yes, but to humans danger is not the end. It is the beginning. You call it predator. We call it challenge. You call it nightmare. We call it teacher. And once we learn what it can do, we will turn its power into ours." The chamber held its breath. The predator shrieked again, but the sound felt hollow before his words. He looked across the sea of faces and added the final truth. "The predator does not terrify me because I know where it came from. It is not a monster born of chaos. It is a reflection of us we built. Machines that screamed like this long before you named this one. We gave them wings, we gave them wheels, we gave them blades, and we laughed. Not because it was funny, but because we knew that if we could laugh at the scream, then the scream had no power over us." Silence fell so deep that even the hum of the projector seemed faint. The alien students stared, their eyes wide, their bodies tense. some in fear, some in awe. But none could deny the weight of the words, for the predator had been unmasked, not just as a danger but as a shadow of something far worse, humanity itself. The human smiled faintly as he finished his words, a smile not cruel but certain, and as the silence stretched, the truth settled over the academy like a shroud. The screaming metal predator would remain a lesson. Yes, but not the one it had been before. For the real lesson, the one that would echo through halls and generations alike, was simple. Humans were not prey. They were not fragile. They were the predators who laughed at predators, and that laughter once heard could never be forgotten. The academy never returned to what it had been before the day. The human laughed for generations. The screaming metal predator had been the symbol of fear. The perfect example of why caution must be honored and why arrogance leads to death. Yet after the human spoke, after he revealed weakness, after he showed how fear itself could be mastered, the predator was no longer a legend of terror. It was a shadow. And the shadow pointed to something greater and far more dangerous. Students whispered his words in the corridors. They repeated them in their training sessions, not as rebellion, but as instinct. They no longer froze when the hologram screamed. They no longer looked at its bladed limbs with wide eyes. Instead, they tilted their heads and asked, what would the human see? What weakness would he find? The instructor saw this change, and it unsettled them. Yet they could not stop it, for the knowledge had already rooted itself. In young minds, once fear is broken, it cannot be rebuilt, not in the same way. The council debated again and again whether the human was a threat or a gift. Some feared he would unmake the foundation of their teachings. Others feared something greater, that he was not unique, that all humans carried this same defiance, this same ability to laugh where others trembled. The thought of an entire species like him made their scales twitch and their feathers bristle. It meant the galaxy had not found one dangerous mind, but a dangerous people. The human himself never sought power. He walked the halls quietly. He answered questions with the same calm certainty he carried from the beginning, and every word spread like fire through dry grass. He was not trying to lead. He was not trying to frighten. He was only telling the truth. But sometimes the truth was more terrifying than any weapon in time. The academy changed, the lesson of the screaming metal predator remained. But it was no longer a story of fear, it became a story of perspective. The hologram was still summoned. The scream still filled the chamber, the blade still flashed in the light. But now the instructor would pause and speak of the day. A human had laughed and explained why the predator was not unstoppable, but only misunderstood. Every student who heard the story sat differently after that, their spines straighter, their eyes sharper, their thoughts forever altered. For the lesson was no longer about the predator. It was about what it meant to face fear and master it. The students who had once flinched at every simulated roar now began to look at one another with questions in their eyes. If humanity could survive such horrors, if humanity could create worse and laugh, then what else was possible? What else could be mastered? What else could be bent from terror into tool? The human never needed to answer those questions, his laughter already had. Years later, when those same students stood on real battlefields, when the galaxy roared with machines and creatures and storms, they remembered the lesson. Not the scream, not the blades, not the predator itself, but the echo of a human's laugh carrying across the academy chamber, shattering fear and replacing it with something far stronger. The predator had been unmasked, the academy had been transformed, and the galaxy had been warned. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was not fragile. Humanity was the predator that laughed at predators, and in that laughter lay the most dangerous truth of all, the end.